Hello, everyone. I've been talking about how progressives hate our criminal justice system, but they're not the only ones. Libertarians do too.
So there are 9.8 million human beings on planet Earth living inside of cages that we know of. In 2010, the US was home to about 309 million people, 4.5% of the world's total population, but housed 23% of the world's prisoners. So take a moment to think about what this means.
Okay, I thought about it. The United States is a wealthy country, right? So you'd expect it to be an outlier? That would make sense, correct?
It means we imprison more people than enormous autocratic countries like China. We imprison more people than Russia.
And that's great that the United States locks up more people than Russia and China. In Russia and China, there is no such thing as a rule of law. In the United States, there is. If you're a Russian and you call the police after someone commits a crime against you, chances are the police aren't going to do anything. But in the United States, we have a rule of law, and the police will actually investigate the crime and hold the person responsible. Unlike in Russia and China, in the United States, our property rights are protected. And if someone steals something from us or commits some sort of violent act against one of us, then we can go to the police and get that person held accountable. That's what's great about the United States criminal justice system and why it's far superior to the system in Russia or China.
Compared to the size of our population, our rate of imprisonment dwarfs our closest allies, like the United Kingdom, France, and Canada.
Okay, but you're being disingenuous here. The United States is not really in a similar position to those countries. For you to have a fair comparison, Great Britain, France, or Canada would need to border some extremely impoverished country, just like the United States borders Mexico. If you took a poor country like Nigeria and managed to move it so that it shared a large border with, let's say, France, and France failed to secure that border, then what would end up happening is people in Nigeria would end up making drugs to sell to the French. France would then end up having this huge drug supply, and there would be all these drug gangs. And what would end up happening is the French would start getting addicted to those drugs. And then the people who become addicts would end up losing their jobs. And then once they lose their jobs, those people would go out and commit crimes to support their drug addiction. That would in turn lead to a lot more crime. That would in turn lead to a very much higher incarceration rate. And that's why the United States has such a high incarceration rate. And to compare us to a country like France, that's simply unfair and disingenuous.
As of 2010, there were over 1.6 million post-trial inmates serving sentences in America's state and federal facilities. This number does not include those being detained pre-trial or those on probation. The most unique feature of incarceration in America is the large and active role of our federal government.
Bullshit. The amount of people in federal prison is 200,000. The amount of people in state prisons is 1.3 million. So when you say that the federal government has a big role in the United States having a high incarceration rate, you are literally talking out of your ass.
In most countries, crime is reacted to at the local or regional level, whereas the American government finances and legislates a significant portion of law enforcement at the national level. State governments still do their fair share of incarceration, though. California and Texas incarcerate more than other states with over 171,000 inmates each. Florida is a close third with over 103,000 prisoners. But no single state locks up more people than the federal government with over 208,000 inmates.
Am I supposed to be shocked by this? The United States, which is a huge country, locks up more prisoners than the state of California? To me, that should be common sense.
Perhaps the nickname Land of the Free, Home of the Brave should be updated. Though I suppose you need to be brave to endure the highest likelihood of incarceration the world has ever known. Prisons are not what we think about when we think of America, and they shouldn't have to be. A free nation shouldn't imprison so many people, and a fiscally responsible nation can't afford to. With close to $40 billion a year in state correctional spending, the financial costs are obvious and staggering alone.
What you don't understand is the United States cannot afford not to spend this money incarcerating people. Because if it did, then we would stop having a rule of law. If someone stole from me, there would be nothing I could do. That person would never go to prison under any circumstance. If someone could rob me without consequence, then I'm not going to have property rights anymore. I'm not going to be free in my own country. What you're proposing is completely unacceptable, and who's going to suffer the most for it? Of course it's going to be the poor and the middle class. If you really want to fix this problem, then secure the US-Mexican border. 94% of drugs that enter the United States come in from Mexico, and drugs are responsible for the vast amount of crimes committed in the United States, and almost all of the incarceration rate is going to be attributable to these drugs.
But the human costs are often underappreciated. 1.6 million fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters of American families are incarcerated. It's time for people to realize that the criminal justice system in America is desperately in need of reform.
You're being disingenuous again. Again, you fail to bring up the fact that 5.4 million people are on probation and parole. Those are people who are completing drug rehabilitation programs. They're able to get custody of their kids again. They're able to take care of their family again. Stuff that they couldn't do when they were addicted to drugs. Millions of people quit drugs because they don't want to end up incarcerated. And in order to get the people to quit drugs, the threat needs to be real. That means when people mess up and continue to commit crimes or fail to go to these drug rehabilitation programs, they need to be held accountable, and they ultimately need to be punished. And that's why we imprison people. We don't do it because we just like doing it. We do it as a last resort. If we did it because we just liked doing it, then the amount of people incarcerated would not be dwarfed by the number of people on probation and parole.